Hi everybody and welcome. One of the things that we know for sure is that many different businesses have experienced many different things over the last year to 18 months. So I thought today we might just have a conversation and see what some of those experiences look like out there. So I have with me today Gael Gordon, and I know Gael rather well, so I thought it might be a really nice idea for Gael to introduce herself.
Thank you, Gina. I'll give a wee bit of a backstory. I've got quite an extensive experience in business management, and I've lived in Auckland for 30 years. Don't hold that against me. I am a born and bred South Island person. And basically, when I moved from Auckland in 2019, I came down here anticipating to just navel gaze and work out what I was going to do with my future. Didn't work out that way because before I'd even left Auckland, I had two clients asking me to do business with them. So I've been backwards and forwards to Auckland now for 2.5 years. So basically what I do is I call myself a freelance business manager. I mentioned it at a networking group this morning when someone said, "What do you do?" I said, I basically go into companies and do all the, I won't swear, but the word was effectively, I do all the rubbish that the owner of the business either doesn't want to do, doesn't know how to do, or can't do. So I'll go and I'll clean up messes in companies of any sort. And ultimately, it always comes down to working with the people. And
That sounds like a fascinating role.
Yeah. Fascinating is an interesting word. Yeah.
So I understand that you were quite new to Nelson at the beginning of this whole COVID thing. Had you been here before, or did you just choose Nelson randomly?
I didn't realise what depth of ties I had to Nelson when I moved here. I'd spent all of my summer holidays from the age of about 2 months, which I don't remember that one, but every year the family came up here for the holidays at Tahuna Beach. I'd also had business opportunities to come to Nelson where I could have done my business in one day, but it always took 2 nights to stay here, so I could go to the market on the Saturday. So I felt I had this affinity, and I lived in Motueka about 11 years ago. I was there for 5 months at the pinnacle of my career when I was packing apples.
Wow,
and then when I moved here, I'd only been here for a short period of time, and my eldest brother came to stay, and he had taken the time to read the family tree that my father had done, and I didn't bother reading it because it was all these photos of funny-looking people in funny hats and black and white photos.
Which we all had.
And in reading that with a different set of eyes now that I was living here, I discovered that I actually am a 6th-generation Nelsonian.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah, so I've got long tentacles here is probably the right thing. So.
Gosh, so then when you did decide to move here, not knowing that at the time, obviously it was just as this whole COVID thing was coming to light. What was your experience?
It was a pretty tough one because I moved here knowing 3 people, which was a couple I was friends with and another girlfriend. The girlfriend left not long after I moved here. I don't think it was because I moved here, but I don't know. We'll never find that one out. So I was only in that phase of getting to know people. A neighbour down the road had introduced herself, and we were starting to form a really lovely friendship. I'd met a few people in business environments, but not much. To get thrown into a lockdown in that scenario, knowing virtually nobody, being told you're going to go into a bubble, not knowing what that meant or who I could even go into it with. And from a business perspective, what happened was, I had these 2 clients when I came here, and I started to think, okay, I'll continue on with this business work. I picked up a client in Fiji. I was doing business physically up there. It was a huge opportunity beyond what I was actually just initially gauged for. I'd picked up some clients here, and then literally, as probably most business people in Nelson know, and across New Zealand, the rug got pulled out from under my feet. Going virtual was a very limited opportunity. Basically from thinking I had the world at my fingertips to Gail's got no money coming in, and yes, thank you very much, I'd like my hand out, which I've never had done in my life, ever.
Right, so you had a fledgling business that was kind of cut off at the knees.
Absolutely, well, completely cut off at the feet.
Even got started. Wow, gosh, that would have been really impactful for you, actually. Yeah. So you just rode that out, did you, that first period of time?
I had to make peace with it pretty quickly because I do freely admit I went into a pretty dark hole to the extent of how long is this going to go for? Will I need to sell my home? What does that look like? Most of it was irrational thinking, but it still was very real at the time. Then I made peace with it and just decided to get on and sort of do other work. I became very interested in the geopolitical scene, but which I don't need to go into today.
Yeah. So you've got clients in Auckland, and obviously they've locked down more times than we have. So what kind of impact did that have on your business?
Well, it was very up and down, and so they've had 3 lockdowns, and now this big one, I think, is their 4th one. So each time that happened, I've got flights booked, and bingo, you're not going. With what's happened most recently, which I think is really what's relevant for today's conversation, is the impact I'm hearing and seeing from Auckland. I've got a number of friends still up there, that close friends, and I've also got, as you say, clients up there. Whereas last year there was all the shock around lockdowns, and then there was almost the excitement in some cases because it was like, "Ooh, look, we've got all this time, we can do these things."
I know, right? There were all these people that was, they had all these goals that they were all over social media with their exercise regimes and the DIY projects. And,
Yeah. Well, what I'm seeing and hearing now is that novelty has well and truly worn off. There's a lot of, and I'm going to speak mostly about the Auckland experience, and I know, people have been very fond of bagging Auckland. I probably did it myself even when I was living up there, because I would always say I'm a Cantabrian, not an Aucklander. But what happens in Auckland, whether we like it or not, living in the South Island or anywhere else that's not in the same suffering state that they're in, this country needs Auckland to survive, and I'm concerned that Auckland is not the place it used to be. I'm hearing some pretty horror stories. So from my business point of view, I've again had to go, no money coming in from that field. Once again, put my hand out. Thank you, government. But the seriousness of what I'm seeing up there and hearing, I'll give an example with my client that I'll be up there as soon as possible. I'm hearing the anger that's coming out now in business owners. They are seeing this as total disregard for what businesses would need to do to survive, and their futures are just literally, I'm seeing a picture in my mind of just puppets pulling a string. And you cannot run a business that way.
Because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Obviously, I know from my experience we do very similar work, and there's been quite a difference between for us, we've only had 2 lockdowns. There's been quite a difference between the first lockdown and the second lockdown, and I work nationally, so I get quite a good overview of the mood of the country. What are you seeing as a difference between the beginning, when, like you say, there was a little bit of a novelty factor, but also a fear factor? There was a lot of uncertainty, and people were really willing to comply because of that fear and that unknown, and now we're sort of 18 months down the track. What are you seeing?
From the business point of view, disbelief is probably the nicest thing I could say. Like, you can see the situation is being managed. It's like, let's lock down 1.5 million people for the sake of one dead person at age 90. So I think that's where this anger's coming up.
So this is the business owners themselves that you're seeing anger. And within their businesses, their employees, what are you seeing?
At the moment, I'm not dealing directly with the employees, but the company that'll be my major client, having known how they were through the last 18 months, because I was up there every fortnight, I've seen that roller coaster of emotions. We were doing a bit of strategic planning one time, and I was getting their feedback in writing, and some of the things that kept coming back then, and this is back in the middle of last year, or towards the end of the year perhaps, a lot of them were saying one of the biggest threats was COVID, and that's what they were writing. So they knew then that this may not go away. So I can't answer your question directly as what's going on, because I haven't seen it firsthand. I'm sensing that when I'm next back up there, I am walking into an environment that could be swimming in fear, unknown, confusion, potentially the anger. Maybe some there that'll be really happy because they've just been away on a lovely long period of lockdown. I don't know, but I'm sensing it could be an unknown territory for me, and I'm going to need to know how to adapt to that very quickly.
I think there's so many different elements, isn't there? Like I said, I kind of, what I experienced was in the second lockdown, there was, at the beginning of it, there was this real, we know what to do, there's less uncertainty this time, the systems are in place. It was kind of almost like a relaxed kind of, we've been here, we've done this, we know what to do. Yeah. And then somewhere in the middle, it kind of changed. It was, and once again, this is, up and down the country, it was like this apathy descended upon the nation. And I'm not quite sure, because it seemed to happen all at the same, everybody's mood changed pretty much within days of each other. So I guess there's that to deal with as well. How do we take people from the sense of, so we've got a whole combination, we've got fear, we've got anger, we've got still uncertainty, we've got a lot of conflicting ideas about how to move forward as a nation, and we've got this underlying apathy that's sitting there. What are your thoughts around how we deal with that in a way that's understanding of the, I guess what I'm thinking is there's no one mood for, people, what people are feeling is going to show up in their workplace in lots of different ways. And I'm seeing that already. Somebody will say to me, so-and-so in their workplace did this thing that was so incredibly out of character for them, without the realisation that the reason they did that was basically a symptom of what we've all experienced. So there's that needing to understand that this looks very different in lots of different people. And how do we manage that as employers? And how do we manage that as people?
I think we have to start with managing it as people. If we try to manage it as, in a business role, you do have to manage it as a business person, an employer, whatever title you want to give them, unless we know how to manage it as a person and manage ourselves first. We are only going to be kidding ourselves. We're managing it as a business. And what I mean by that, if you're fearful as a business owner, you've got probably every right at the moment to be quite fearful for your business or for your future or for your family, all those, it's natural and it's understandable. If you're coming into a work environment where you've got potentially a whole workforce or majority or at least even a few employees that are feeling uncomfortable, for a softer word, and you've got your own stuff that you haven't dealt with and you're about it, you're going to make some decisions that may not be the wisest for your business. So I think business people are really going to have to flip themselves on the head and go, what's going on for me first? Because if they're angry, fearful, whatever, they will get triggered very, very quickly when they have an employee who might also be triggered. And in terms of that level of sort of stress that's out there, I say I haven't been back there to physically experience it. One thing I was commenting to friends over the last 3 months or thereabouts when I've been going backwards and forwards is I have felt and witnessed what I would call a heightened increase in craziness, and I used to watch it on the motorways. Now this might sound like what motorways versus business, what am I talking about? I've lived up there for 30 years. I've been going back for every fortnight ever since I've been back down here, so I'm still in touch with the city. And I try to keep off the motorways when I'm in Auckland, but when I have, I've been noticing the crazy driving, like cars just coming up behind you and doing dangerous manoeuvres. I've always seen it on the motorways, but not like I see it now. At each visit, it's like, this is getting crazier.
Right.
And rightly or wrongly, I'm seeing that as symptomatic of this building up of something within people. They don't know what to do with that energy, so they're either driving like lunatics or out there beating up the cat and the dog or their wife or whatever, getting drunk, getting smoked, whatever it is, they're doing things that are probably more than they would perhaps otherwise because they're trying to process.
Quite symptomatic, isn't it? One of the things that it's very, very simple tool that I use all the time is I'm noticing that, and it's just as a statement, about ourselves in terms of that awareness of what we're experiencing. I'm noticing that, and being able to sort of notice that in sort of almost like a removed, detached state is sometimes quite useful in terms of being able to take that step back from the behaviour that's been driven by the emotion, and to be able to maybe as a business owner make a slightly more informed decision. Now, you told me actually about one of the employees within one of the businesses that you work with, and it was just prior to this lockdown, and you had quite an interesting experience in terms of the business identifying that there could be some things that sit behind the behaviour. Is that something that you would like to share in some detail?
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy to. It was actually before the lockdowns. It was actually about a couple of years before that. But I think it's relevant because it demonstrates that when a business owner or senior manager, whatever, when you're in a position of responsibility for people, you need to be able to, let's say, turn on a dime or turn on a head or whatever I said earlier. So this situation, I'll keep it as short as I can, and I have shared it once with the Trust before. It was a young gentleman who I'd hired, and over a period of time, I noticed, or several of us started noticing in the business, that he was, his performance was shifting, his concentration, his behaviour. We were in a high-risk industry. We had guys up on roofs with high-pressure water blasters, which means water and heights, which is not a great combination from a safety point of view. I was a general manager in the business and started getting feedback from some other guys that didn't feel safe working with this young gentleman. So over a period of time, I was having conversations with him, and it became obvious that he actually admitted he was involved in the drug scene. Promised me he wasn't using, but I was like, I think so. So long story short around that bit, the time came when we knew we had to get him drug tested. So we organised a random drug test on site. He had an 80% fail on that, which was pretty much get him off the site, get him into the office. I'd spoken to the business owner through this process, and it had been agreed between the two of us. And I'm going to freely admit that what I'm about to say would have been against employment law, but sometimes you just got to do what's got to do. We'd said, get the guy in, deal with him, get him gone. It would have been an illegally handled, but it was where we were at. We could not have him on our site. So we get the chap in, and I'm fired up, ready to, I know how to do this stuff. It's not the first time I've got rid of a few people. But when he sat down, there was something in his demeanour, and I pulled him up on it because he came in a bit gung-ho. He was the man. I was like, you're not. This conversation's going to get real. He broke down in tears in front of me, and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And I had it cleanly set out. In my head, every sentence lined up, and I had the bullet and the trigger, and the gun and the finger on the trigger, whatever you say. But when I saw this emotional breakdown, and he reached in his pocket and he said, I want you to read this. And pulled out a piece of paper, and I was like, are you sure? What is this? He said, well, I was going to give it to the owner, but you're here. I opened it up and I read it, and it was a letter from a psychologist. And without giving away any of the details of the gentleman or what it was, when I read it, it explained something that had happened to in his life at a relatively young age, of about 11, that rocked his world beyond anything he was able to cope with. And from there, and it went on to say that he'd been he'd been really well liked in school, he'd been doing top grades, and that's why we hired him. I could see this potential in him. But he'd fallen by the wayside and got into the wrong crowd, and over time he was now presenting as a 18 or 19-year-old young man, and hadn't ever had any support around this upheaval in his life 8 years or so ago, and he'd got himself into the drug scene, which was the obvious conclusion of where he was going to head. Right. And so we were seeing, what I was seeing and I was experiencing was this young man who was in a pretty dire strait. He had also got himself now in front of the judiciary. He was lined up to, he said basically lost his job there was a fair chance he would be off to prison.
Right.
He had already had a pre-hearing, or however that system works. So I'm sitting there seeing this, going, if I go through with the execution that was planned, this guy could go to prison.
And he was changing his pathway.
Absolutely change his pathway. And while, I should try and be PC, but I'm not going to be, he was a skinny little white boy. And I would suspect that he would have been dealt to pretty badly if he went to prison. So I'm sitting there in that moment going...
It's a lot of responsibility for you, isn't it?
It was, I can remember it as clear, I'll never forget it. So in that moment when all that was going on, it's taken longer to share it than it was for when we're there. I actually remember saying to myself, I have no tools in my toolkit to deal with this. I've never struck this before. I'm dealing literally with somebody's life. And I also had a business owner who was going, I want you to ring me as soon as this is over and done with. I'm going, okay. In that moment, something came through, and that's where I actually was able to sit there quietly enough to allow, I'm going to say, a form of wisdom, innate wisdom, or something to happen. And I put it to this young man that we'd be putting him on to a suspended without pay, and we would go through the process of what we do here. Now, he was still going to go, he had to go, but by making that decision on the spot to suspend him...
You kept him employed.
He kept him employed. So he could go quite legitimately to that court hearing and say, hand on heart, I still have a job. Meanwhile, we were looking to hire more staff anyway, so we were able to just bring in an extra person to replace him. It wasn't costing the business any extra money by putting him on suspended without pay, and it also gave him a chance to get himself cleaned up. I also said, we'll revisit it, we'll keep revisiting it. I didn't want to tell him at that stage that he was going to be gone. I didn't want him back in the business, not purely because of what he had done, but I felt that he was coming back into an environment that was going to be unhealthy. We knew that most of our guys were on the weed or whatever. Any one of them could have probably had that test and had the same outcome. So I didn't think coming back into that environment where he was in with a whole lot of big, burly young men, that he didn't really fit there.
So how did it end?
Well, it ended up really quite lovely in the end. That's what he did do. He wanted... sorry, we just had a little equipment failure. We'll keep this going. He was happy with that. He was able to go back to the judge. And I kept in touch with him every now and then just to say Harry is going. And then one day I sent him a note and pretty much said, look, I think the best thing from here is if you actually resign, and explained the reason why I felt if he resigned. Anyone that was to form a future employer that was asking for a reference, I could easily say that he resigned, as opposed to we got rid of him, because I wouldn't lie to another employer. And then and I said, look, that's what I think we do. Please do that. And then one day he sent me a note and he said, I can never thank you enough for what you did. You literally saved my life.
Yeah, so powerful, isn't it?
And I think it is powerful. It took me a long time to be able to share that story without crying, because it was so, it impacted on me a lot. Yeah. And it will always have that impact on me.
But I mean, it's a great segue actually into some of the challenges that business owners are going to be facing going forward. Not just, we all have different vices, and as I was alluding to earlier, we all have different ways in which the stresses and the tensions of the last 18 months are going to show up. And you mentioned one of the other things that you are starting to see is long-term absences in businesses and how that could affect the businesses themselves.
Yeah.
Are there any other challenges that you can see front of mind that the business owner is going to be dealing with over the next little while?
Yeah. Well, I think the long-term, or at least excessive absenteeism, again, I'm not wanting to make this about jabs or not jabs, but I think there is enough information out there now that people are very concerned. I've already seen firsthand in a company where an employee has had more annual leave in this year, post jab, than this chap had had in 30 years. And I'm hearing it from other people that they're seeing this. So I think for business, I've had this conversation with clients before lockdown. I was saying that I was seeing this happening, that you're going to start seeing employees that are going to be taking extended or abnormal amounts of sick leave. And while, yes, seasonally, you could say in the middle of winter, as it was when I first had these conversations, you could say it's seasonal. What I was stressing is that it will be people that were perfectly healthy that then end up taking extended absenteeism on top of seasonal. I said that, without being a worry wart, I think we do need to prepare ourselves that we could lose people to the interventions that are taking place. What does that look like for a business? So I've already started having those conversations that we need to prepare for that. And on top of things like absenteeism, obviously that puts strain on extra staff.
It sure does, doesn't it? I mean, we've already got so much going on in terms of, the interruption, like you say, and then the supply chain issues, which is knocking on to just about every business that I've spoken to. Then we've got staffing concerns, either with ill health or anxiety or both, or
and getting stressed because they've got to pick up the slack of when people are there.
Yes, yeah. So tools. Have you found any tools that you can say have been useful?
I do have tools for people. It's perhaps for all staff, but more. I'll be launching it on the business owners initially, and it comes down to that what we sort of touched on before. Taking time out for yourself to get into a good space before you start reacting to what's going on. You need to be able to step back and respond.
I'm noticing that that's my favourite.
I'm noticing that I am. That's a good one. Yeah, great one. Yeah, I'm noticing
that I'm really angry. I'm just noticing that I'm really frustrated. I'm noticing that I feel rushed. I'm noticing that I'm quite tired. I'm noticing that. Yeah. It's such a simple
that's a great one
to remember.
Yeah. And when they go through that, I'm noticing, fill in the gap, is what can they do around that? Because noticing is a really important awareness, knowing that it's, because then you can go, okay. Because I think the last thing we want to start seeing is, well, if we remember, business owners are humans, we're all humans. So if we take away the titles, everybody in business is a human being. So they're all going to be subjected to their own form of emotions and fears and whatever. So I'm noticing that. What can I do now? And I've got a list. I've actually got them written there. I'll try not to
go on. Hit us with them.
Just in case. Right, now I'm in charge. This might just, not everybody likes the first word that begins with M being meditation, and that's up to people whether they want to do that or not. Some people think it's sitting around, cross-legged and chanting Kumbaya. I've relied myself on some guided meditations that really nail the certain aspects that you're working with, and they can clear things as quick as that. So
I know loads of people that have active meditation.
Yeah.
A jolly good run, or a cycle up the cycleway, or equally as meditative, like you say.
And meditative and physical, because that's one of the things I've written here is if that's your thing, get out and get physical in whatever way suits you. I think other ones that are really good, and again, people might go, oh, you roll your eyes, whatever. Get in touch with nature. And for me, one of the things that I'm fortunate with, I have a beehive on my property.
Right.
Yeah, and I've got intimate relationships with 60,000 bees. They all come home to mama at the night. I know that they do. But when you get, and sadly some of them get a little bit off their GPS and they end up in my swimming pool. So I often am out there in the daytime picking up little bees. You get them in your hand. When you've got a little bee sitting on your hand, you have no concept of anything else. You are in the now.
Wow.
And I'm not suggesting everyone runs out and gets beehives or holds them in their hand, but find something in nature that allows you just to focus on that. And it could be just, okay, I'm lucky I've got a good property with big trees around it. I've birds, I've tuis coming in, I've got the herons. It's phenomenal. Even if you're living in an apartment, just go and sit on your balcony and talk to your pot plant, or at least look at your pot plant, watch it move, just be with nature. Get out and walk along to Hunanui Beach, or,
I was talking to someone in Auckland a couple of weeks ago, and they've rerouted their journey to work so that they can walk through this really lovely public park, because they like the stonework.
There you go.
So that brings them joy, just kind of walking past that stonework in nature.
Yeah, that's the thing. We get so busy in our busyness that we miss all those wonderful opportunities, because nature's not the least bit bothered about lockdown. I don't see anything happening around in nature that's going, oh, we're in lockdown, we shouldn't be doing this. Nature gets on with it. And if we can tune into that, even if it's only at the beginning, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, it doesn't have to be.
So finding that release from that those moments where you kind of get light relief from everything that's going on is what you're saying.
Yep, it gives us a chance. Another one that I think is really undervalued but is starting to become more commonly talked about is gratitude. And I first learned of this years ago when I started, did some work with a personal coach. The first thing she got me to do, she said, you need to go and write down 20 things to be grateful for. And I looked at her and said, you must be crazy. Have you not been listening to all my sad stories that I'm sharing with you? She said, no, you're going to do your homework. And I resisted it because I thought it was the most ridiculous thing when I was going through a bit of a crisis. But being the good little girl that I am, I thought I was going to get gold stars in my hand if I did it correctly. So I did my 20. And what I started to realise is I could see what she was saying, because in that first round, while I was in a messy space, I actually started writing down things like, I'm grateful I got out of bed this morning and went to the gym. And you kind of go, oh, okay. Or I'm grateful that I managed to do something else that was, that I had been resisting doing. And you started nipping away at the little things, because I always thought when people talked about gratitude, it was going to have to be the big stuff. I've just secured a big deal that's worth millions, or I've made it and such. And it's like, nah, it's nipping this little stuff. So I still do this. It's a practice. I'm lucky. I'm on a thread with some very dear friends around the globe. And we actually share gratitudes just about every day, and it just gives you, and it can be anything, and literally give gratitude to what's happening here. This is brilliant. So
I'd be really grateful if somebody cleaned my car.
Well, there you go.
It's filthy.
Well, when Strawn actually cleans it, go back and say, I'm grateful that I've got him in my life.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, we overlook it.
Yeah, those little things, and certainly here in Nelson, and probably everywhere in New Zealand, how lucky are we to live where we are in terms of scenery and weather and the beauty of our country. So
there's a gentleman who's been very dear in my life, Dr. David Martin. He's sort of doing some wonderful stuff on the world stage at the moment.
He's a powerhouse, isn't he?
And so I'm grateful that I've got him in my life as a personal friend. He actually used an expression last year when we were in lockdown, and he referred to monotonous goodness. And to put those two words together seems to be almost like it doesn't make sense, because monotonous,
my brain's wondering where you're going,
because you always think monotonous is something that's negative, boring, whatever, but basically the way I interpreted it was, it's like if I talk about the bees, monotonous goodness. Those little bees are going backwards and forwards. I sit down sometimes and just for a while with the bees, and you just watch them coming and going, monotony, goodness.
So comfort in simplicity.
It's comfort in simplicity, yeah.
Yeah, nice, I like it.
And while I'm mentioning David, he's not paying me this, there's no commissions on any of this, but he put out a documentary about 5 or 6 years ago called Future Dreaming, and I've had the pleasure of watching that many times, and I think if anyone can get their hands on that, it's free. You go on the internet, you'll find it. The truths that he put in there, filmed in 2015 I think it was, are even more relevant today than they were when he put that out. And it's looking at how humans aren't showing up, what the history behind it's been. It's a very easy watch. It's so deep, but so easy to take on board. And I'd highly recommend people to have a read of that.
I must say I've heard of it several times and am yet to watch it. So
okay, guess what you're doing at the weekend?
That'll be on my to-do list.
Future dreaming at my house.
So I guess what you're saying is, as business owners, we have a good understanding of what is required within the business, and that what is required currently is more personal. It's more around our own experience and understanding that the experience of the others in our team and in our business will be expressed in lots of different ways, and finding ways in which to acknowledge that and to manage that
humanly. Yeah.
I was going to say humanely, but with humanness.
Yeah,
really.
You've summed it up. I think you've said that beautifully. Yeah, if we can each, and this goes to across all humans as opposed to the hierarchy structure names. If you, as a human being, can see one of your other fellow human beings is struggling, and you have the ability to, rather than go up there and shame them or tell them they're going to lose their job or get going, work harder, if you can actually in a moment just ask them, even you ask them how are they, but do it not the how you doing, and which is the one we're so used to, how you doing, and you've walked 3 metres away before you've even heard the answer. If you actually look them in the eye and go, what's going on? Are you okay?
Yeah,
People know the difference, that you're actually connecting.
So we're looking for changes in behaviour, and that's not always negative. In
No.
my experience, sometimes that appears to be a positive
No, it's
change in
huge.
behaviour, but actually it's not a normal behaviour.
it's not
And
normal.
so what's sitting behind that as well.
Yeah. And businesses will get through this I believe if they really start adopting this, they will get through whatever we're going through right now.
So I'm just looking at my notes here because I know that we've probably reached the end of cup of tea time. How can people get hold of you?
Gael Gordon at gaelgordon.com, that's my website, and Gael Gordon at, what's my email address? I should know it, Gael Gordon.
You're hilarious.
I don't use it.
It's on the website.
It's on the website. You'll find me, just Google Gael Gordon, she's there. No, don't Google, DuckDuckGo, thank you. Yeah.
Gorgeous. All right, Gail. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to have a chat about this, and hopefully there was something in there that was useful and resonates for the people that are listening, and don't be afraid to reach out and hear stories of others and maybe get some tools, and we're all here to help each other.
And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Nelson Tasman Business Trust for inviting me to do this. I think, I really appreciate that. It's good. So thank you very much. And thanks to Sarah, and thanks to Risham. Always get your names right when you're doing this stuff. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.